Inside Florida Politics, powered by the USA Today Florida Network. Florida Republicans are blasting a Trump rally speaker's remarks about Puerto Rico. President Joe Biden tries to weigh in and ends up putting Democrats on the defensive. And Ron DeSantis is furiously campaigning against two ballot items down the stretch. Hello, I'm USA Today campaign reporter Zac Anderson. And those are some of the stories I'll be discussing this week with my colleagues Antonio Fins, John Kennedy, and Ana Goni-Lessan. Welcome, everyone. Happy Halloween. We'll call it an October surprise. The comedian's remarks at Trump's Madison Square Garden rally Sunday, calling Puerto Rico a, quote, floating island of garbage, are roiling the election with just days before final votes are cast. Florida has a huge Puerto Rican population, and the state's Republican leaders were quick to condemn the remarks by comedian Tony Hinchcliffe. Antonio, you don't often see Republicans pushing back hard like this about something coming out of a Trump rally. Does that tell you how influential the Puerto Rican vote is in Florida?
Well, not only that, yeah, very influential. We're talking about 1.2 million people. Remember, they are U.S. citizens, so they are registered to vote for the most part. But, it's not just the number. It's the fact that it's not an exaggeration to say that Republicans have courted the Florida Puerto Rican vote almost with the same kind of energy and determination and drive that they courted the Cuban American vote. And look how successful that's been. And one of the reasons that we talk about Florida really not being in play anymore for a presidential election is because, remember, the key battleground in Florida used to be that I-4 corridor from Tampa all the way to Daytona, particularly Orlando, the Orlando counties. And that's where a lot of the Puerto Rican vote is basically concentrated.
Outside of New York, the Orlando area is one of the biggest populations for Puerto Ricans in the whole country. And you've seen Republicans really go there and aggressively court them over the years.
They have. And part of it is because that is a kind of a very conservative leaning part of the Puerto Rican electorate. If you look about New York, that's more liberal, more democratic of leanings. In Florida, that's not the case. A lot of the Puerto Ricans that have come to Florida, particularly after the hurricanes and after the 2019 political revolt on the island against government corruption, they are more leaning toward the Republican cause. They believe they are suspicious of government. They're suspicious of government regulation. Many of them are Hispanic, evangelical Christians. So it is a population that they've had a lot of success with. And the last thing you want is at a closing argument rally for the former president to have anybody refer to Puerto Rico as an island of garbage.
Yeah, and you really saw the reaction in Florida was immediate. Rick Scott, the Republican U.S. Senator who's running for re-election this year, came out, and disavowed these comments. You saw Republican Congress people from across Florida. You don't really see this. Typically people will keep their heads down, especially in recent years. Trump, obviously he is keeping track of what people are saying. And you just don't see this type of pushback from Republicans against something that happens in a Trump rally. We also saw pushback from a lot of Puerto Rican cultural figures, musicians, Bad Bunny. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so Bad Bunny, I would say, is arguably probably the most popular, famous Puerto Rican at the moment. I know you have J-Lo, but he's from the island, right? And so he came out really against these comments, and he endorsed Kamala Harris. Nicky Jam, also another music artist, he originally was, he appeared with Trump a couple weeks ago. He endorsed Trump. Yesterday, he took that back. It's the fallout is definitely real. I don't know how it's going to affect, the everyday Latino voter. I spoke to some Latinos here in Tallahassee yesterday, and it's interesting. Some of them were very upset. Venezuelans, Mexicans, even though they talked about Puerto Ricans, Tony Hinchcliffe still said things about, immigrants and Latinos in general. But we'll see how it goes.
He said something about Latinos having a lot of babies. He also made a watermelon
Yes.
joke, saying that he was carving watermelons with a black friend. There was other things in his comedy set and throughout that night that a lot of people found offensive. You think that this could maybe reverberate with a broader Latino community?
Yeah, so it's kind of like they like to put us in a monolith. Not gonna lie, Latino community is we're all very different. However, it's kind of the way that the people I spoke to yesterday kind of made it sound is, well, if you attack one, you attack us all. I don't know why Trump's previous comments on the border, Mexicans coming through the border, on Haitians. They're not Latino, but they're still Caribbean. They're still minority. I don't know why those didn't affect people as much as this. But the Florida Democratic Party's voter information hotline, the one that's in the Spanish language, it saw 325% uptick in calls the 2 days after the Madison Square Garden rally. So, people are listening to this today. So,
Yeah, this really seems to have broken through. I was actually did a story yesterday. I was talking to some people of Puerto Rican heritage in Allentown, actually the day before. And, Allentown is in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is, maybe the most critical swing state. And I didn't realize this, but that whole area, the Lehigh Valley area, is really has gotten a big Hispanic population over the years. And Allentown is actually a majority Hispanic community. And Trump actually, his first rally or one of his first rallies after Madison Square Garden was in Allentown. And people were really talking about these comments by Tony Hinchcliffe. And they had really ricocheted through the Puerto Rican community in Allentown. Everybody that I talked to said it was the buzz of the community. I talked to a woman who was a food truck owner who said her customers were coming up and talking to her about it. She sells traditional Puerto Rican food. I talked to a radio station owner who said that he was just flooded with calls. He owns 5 radio stations that broadcast to Latinos in Pennsylvania, and he said that just people. His show on Monday morning just blew up. He normally does 20 or 30 minutes for his political morning show, and he went over an hour. And when he posted the show on YouTube, it had almost 1,000 comments. And he said just a lot of people were saying that this sort of just woke them up, like maybe got them off the sidelines. Antonio, John, I mean, do you think that if this moves a few thousand votes or, in a swing state like Pennsylvania, that it could have a difference?
Yeah, Zach. I mean, look, the Trump reaction to this is particularly, it's a real tightrope for him, because the fact of the matter is, I was at Mar-a-Lago on Tuesday when they did this big, they had this big event, and he didn't even address the topic. He at the very end, he called it an absolute love fest, and nobody's seen anything like this event. He does, his brand is, he does not apologize for anything. He doesn't take anything back. He doesn't walk anything back. And that put him in a really difficult position because, how do you not walk something back that has been damaging? I think what you have just talked about in Pennsylvania is incredibly important. In that state that, you win elections by tens of thousands of votes. This could be what you have just described, could be a game changer. I will say the one other thing in it is that for Trump, his response when he talked to Hannity saying, well, I didn't know who this guy was. I didn't pick him. I don't know. Well, that's also kind of troublesome because you're either a hands-on corporate executive who's going to fix this, like he says, or you are kind of not watching what's going on and you don't have hands-on, and you will have chaos in the White House like he did in his first term. So it's a real tightrope for him.
Right. And actually, some of the Puerto Ricans that I talked to in Allentown were saying the same thing. Like, you don't know who the person who's at your rally. And Trump, you're right. I mean, he doesn't apologize. He did at the Allentown rally, though, try and sort of wrap himself in Puerto Rican support. He had the island shadow Republican senator there who has endorsed him and who came up on stage with him and talked about how she thinks that he would be a good president. He, made a couple of mentions of Puerto Ricans and said that he loved them. So he wasn't apologizing, but he was trying to do some damage control there, certainly, and definitely trying to do some cleanup and trying to project support to Puerto Ricans. And then he was on defensive, and now the campaign is actually on offense again. The Democrats also got a bit of an October surprise when President Biden tried to weigh in on the Puerto Rican controversy and made a comment that many interpreted as calling Trump supporters garbage. The president said he was just referring to the comedian's comments, and there's a debate over where to put the apostrophe in supporters, whether it is possessive and just referring to that one comedian or plural. But John, could this energize the GOP? Trump's really leaning into this. At his rally last night, he actually got into a garbage truck. He was wearing like a sort of almost not like a garbage man uniform, but like a construction uniform. I mean, the Republican Party has really run with this and tried to reverse it and put Democrats on the defensive.
Yeah, it's a mess at this point, and when you're explaining, you're losing on these kind of political gaffes. And in a coin toss race like this one between Harris and Trump, it's hard to say whether this can rally a few more votes for Trump. When you think about his pearl clutching at this comment by Biden about which stemmed from a racist joke that a comedian made at Trump's Madison Square Garden rally. It's really outrageous by Trump because given the kind of vile statements that he's made throughout this campaign about Harris and her supporters.
Yeah, I mean, he's called his opponents vermin. He's called his opponents the enemy within. He's called them evil. I mean, he's made some really, really strong statements.
Yeah, but like everything right now, it's hard to tell if this frenzied finish that this comment is going to further rally Trump backers. It's going to be another point for analysts like us to analyze probably when this election is decided, whenever that is.
Yeah, it does seem like, it's interesting that this is the issue that is dominating the last few days of the campaign here. It just shows how unpredictable elections can be, and both sides are trying to make hay of it. Antonio, do you see more fallout? I mean, do you think that it does seem like at this point, both sides are just really trying to mobilize their base with these comments?
Yeah, and that's been the story of the 2024 presidential campaign. It's been a very visceral, very guttural, emotional campaign. It's not really been driven by a lot of policy debates over issues of importance to Americans of all walks of life. It's really been driven by a lot of the emotions. Even when Harris jumped in the race, the theme was joy, happiness, turn the page. And we're getting this, and you're right about that. I think you guys are absolutely right about the language that's been employed. It's very interesting that it's now the word garbage that has become the flashpoint here, because last week, the word garbage was actually inserted into the political lexicon by Trump when he called, America, this is the garbage can of the world, referring to immigrants coming into the country. Then the comedian picked up on it, and then Biden sort of weighed in on it as well, in a deplorables type comment. But I think that this is how this campaign has been run. It's been run on very larger themes of the democracy at stake, and who's a fascist and who's an authoritarian, and this is the last election in our lifetime. And so that's just been the story of the 2024 campaign, for better or worse.
What do you think here in Florida, how all this garbage talk plays? I mean, the race that it seems like it could have the most influence is the U.S. Senate race between Rick Scott and Debbie Mucarsel-Powell. I mean, that race is the most high profile in Florida right now. You have, a Hispanic woman. You have the U.S. Senator who has really courted Hispanic voters when he was governor. He broke with Trump on some of this stuff and really went to Puerto Rico and after some of the hurricanes and tried to provide support and has tried to distance himself from these comments.
Yeah, it's true. And I think he does have a measure of Teflon here for that reason. He was governor of Florida when Maria hit Puerto Rico back in 2017, and he went there and he welcomed the Puerto Ricans coming to Florida looking for refuge. he has been one of the political figures on the Republican side that has really courted that I-4 corridor, going back to his first gubernatorial campaign. Remember, he spent a lot of time in Central Florida, the Villages, and in that part of Orlando, Orange, and Seminole, and those counties. So I think that he does have a measure. He came out one of the first in Florida to come out and say, hey, they just basically disavow what the comedian said and made sure that he was going to be on the right side of this argument. So I think he does have. He was actually in West Palm Beach on Wednesday with at one of the Cuban restaurant with local Hispanic leaders, and that topic didn't even come up. So I think he does have a buffer there in terms of not being damaged by these comments, or at least not being sort of the guilt by association that tends to blow up when you have these controversies.
It certainly does, though, provide some ammunition for his Democratic opponent. We'll see, whether this makes a difference in the race down the stretch here. Republicans are doing pretty well in Florida, regardless of Biden's flub. Trump seems to be in a pretty strong position in the state. The Senate race is obviously one to watch, but the biggest surprise probably right now, the biggest suspense, is really over these ballot measures that Floridians are voting on right now. One that would legalize recreational marijuana, the other that would protect abortion rights. There's some other interesting ones out there too about making school board races partisan, things like that. But these two on marijuana and abortion are getting the most attention, the most political activism around them, and really. There's a big threshold for them to pass. You got to get 60% of the vote, and both of them seem to be hovering near that. Governor DeSantis has really been campaigning hard against these down the stretch. What's he been up to?
DeSantis has been going ham. Like, this guy is doing multiple press conferences a day with, different agency directors like DCF, Ladapo has joined him. I believe ACA, Jason Wida from ACA. He's doing, and he's with his wife as well, Casey DeSantis, and they're going to all over the state: Tampa, Jacksonville, Orlando, Cape Coral. They're going everywhere speaking out against Amendment 3 and Amendment 4. Amendment 3 talking about how it's backed by outside corporate interests, how marijuana is not healthy for kids, right? And then also backed by Florida physicians against Amendment 4, which is, I believe, last time I checked, it was probably last week. There were about 700 physicians in Florida. A little over 10% of those were OBGYNs who signed on to this petition, and they've stood behind him in their white coats. They've spoken out against Amendment 4, talking about how it's dangerous for women. Now, a lot of the talking points that DeSantis has been using at these rallies, one could say is, they're really pushing against this amendment, trying to find any argument to try to get people to vote against it. Talking about the words and how they're not defined, and the word viability and what does that mean, and also talking about how it's going to turn Florida into this like abortion tourism state. Really just kind of attacking it from all sides. And yeah, he's not letting up. So we're going to see if that worked. Obviously, from what I understand, Zach, I think you said that they're kind of hovering.
Right.
I feel like I've heard.
The polls seem to show these either right around 60. Some have them right below, right above.
Yeah, and I think from talking to physicians, a lot of physicians that I spoke to, they didn't even want to come out and say that they were against this, or didn't even want to talk about it because they were afraid of repercussions from the government or from their job, because they see how intense the fight against Amendment 4 is. But I will say that I spoke to OBGYNs across the state, and they're worried. They're definitely worried. They're already seeing some they're already seeing, women take some risks when it comes to managing a pregnancy because of the Heartbeat Protection Act. So I think, we'll wait and see what happens on Tuesday, but I think it's going to be really close.
Yeah, it definitely looks that way. John, you've covered a lot of these ballot measures over the years. I wonder how unusual it is to have a governor campaigning this aggressively against them. And also, there's been a lot of focus on him using state resources, using the power of state government to try and tip the scales on some of these things, using state agencies to put out messages and advertising.
Yeah, what DeSantis is doing, some might say, is illegal. He is, according to the marijuana campaign, they think that he's spent about $50 million in taxpayer money on TV and radio ads from state agencies, purportedly public service announcements, against it. That's the marijuana campaign. And the marijuana campaign thinks even more has been spent on the Amendment 4 abortion rights campaign by DeSantis. That's public money. That's taxpayer money that the governor is not supposed to be directing toward a political campaign. It's going to be one of those things. You've even had a supporter of the marijuana measure, State Senator Joe Gruters. He's a former Florida Republican Party chairman and a supporter of Donald Trump, who supports the Amendment 3 marijuana measure, by the way. He has called this propaganda. I think you're going to see legislation next year, perhaps, that goes at this, trying to stop a governor like DeSantis from steering public funds toward a political endeavor like these are up there. And these two measures right now are the costliest ballot campaigns in the nation. Combined, they've spent raised and spent about $170 million. And wow. So there's a lot going on here. But like what we've experienced in this DeSantis era of state government, basically all conventions have been thrown out the window. What he's doing may be illegal with this use of taxpayer money in a political campaign, but another thing that he did was threaten TV stations that were airing a controversial ad for the abortion rights measure. He was talking about criminally charging some of these these stations. The governor also has been throwing around, as Ana pointed out, dubious claims about what each of these amendments will do. And his use of misleading language, claims that Amendment 4 is on the ballot because of fraudulent signatures, and lies about what Amendment 3 will allow, pot smoking on school playgrounds, for example. It all seems inspired by the lies that Trump regularly throws out. There's really, another sub-story to this is that we're seeing no guardrails anymore to elections. And DeSantis has taken that to Florida. Perhaps, it's not surprising that we also will have election deniers this year who are going to be on the ballot in November 5th. They're going to be on the ballot running to become election supervisors in 6 Florida counties, including Hillsborough and Palm Beach, which are 2 very big counties. So, while the Democrats may be campaigning that democracy is on the ballot this year, it goes well beyond Trump.
Yeah, and we've written a lot over the years about how DeSantis has been incredibly aggressive in his use of state power, really, pushed it beyond what we've seen from governors in the past. And this just seems like another example of that, where he's willing to use the state government to try and tip the scales as much as he can. Well, that is going to wrap up our show. Stay tuned. We're going to come back after Election Day and break down all of the results. Happy Election Day, everybody. Thank you to our production guru, Rob Landers. We're out of here.